welcome and thank you for attending the final and keynote presentation in our Wisconsin Center for Wildlife speaker series focused on waterfowl and wetlands. Before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to have a few thank yous. First, thanks to many of you who have attended, all of them. I appreciate that. And thanks for being here today. Also, I guess they're not here right now, but I wanted to thank Stacy Allen Bannock in the Dean's office, who's helped with promotion and helping with various tasks there. Sharon Reichert also has helped immensely, and Dr. Scott Hingstrom will help me co-organize this year. We I believe Scott hopes to have this a continual spring speaker series, so hopefully we can keep up the tradition for years to come. So with that, I'll introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Rick Kaminsky, my PhD advisor, UW-SP graduate, master's degree at Michigan State, and PhD there as well with Dr. Harold Prince. Dr. Kaminsky has been mentoring students and working in waterfowl conservation for greater than 40 years. He's a lifelong friend of mine. I'm glad that my path crossed with his less than 10 years ago. And so excited that he's here today to deliver this presentation on culminate the North American waterfowl naming. So thank you, Rick. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you, everyone, and Jake, that's a very nice introduction. It's been 10 years since you showed up at Starkville, Mississippi, and gone on to great things. And I want to assure the dean here, Thomas, that the dean, Jake Straub, is the right person to take the Kennedy Chair here at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. So, as the title says, 100 years of waterfowl conservation. I don't have 100 slides, but I've got close to that, so I'm going to have to race through them here. Okay, that's a younger Kaminsky model. That picture that was taken when I was a student here at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Being proud to be a Point alumnus, learned many great things here, and I'm also proud to have survived the square. And these two gentlemen over here are my advisors and mentors, Drs. Lyle Nauman and Charlie White. Lyle and Charlie, raise your hands, and thank you for coming today and for also being so supportive of me and getting me into graduate school back at a time when I thought I was going to have to go to University of Wisconsin La Crosse and be a nurse. Anyway, these two gentlemen believed in me. They cut me some slack when I skipped their classes to go duck hunting in the morning, but wrote very strong letters that enabled me to get into graduate school. Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the championships that have occurred in the state of South Carolina. Chanticleers University, Coastal Carolina, won the National Baseball Championship. We know the Clemson Tigers won the National Football. We've got to keep our fingers crossed for what's going on this weekend. The boys and the girls are both in the Final Four of NCAA basketball. And we're a young program in terms of waterfowl, wetland science, and conservation, but our goal is to be champions also, and champion science-guided conservation for the Southern Atlantic Flyway and beyond, and look forward to working with Jake and the other Kennedy programs throughout the United States. These are my co-authors on this presentation. These are legendary people in the field of waterfowl and wetlands. I won't name them all. You can read this, the PowerPoint will be online. But these are old guys like me, that baby boomers that started working in waterfowl and wetlands back in the 60s and the 70s and had wonderful careers, either with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, or state organizations. And why do I picture all of them? Because I pirated a bunch of slides from them. they really shared it with me. We're happy to do so. So I mentioned them for their permission of slides for this presentation. Okay, this is going to be a history lesson. This is the former Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, Winston Churchill. And he was a historian himself, and you got to believe what he said. If you don't learn some history, you're doomed to repeat it. So what started the movement in waterfowl conservation? Well, there are several influences, one of which was the market hunting, the slaughter of millions of ducks, geese, shorebirds, and rail. No one has any idea how many birds were actually taken, because birds were not nationally counted back in those days. And I borrow a notion from one of Jake's slides. He counted the number of ducks, I guess you did on that boat, approximately 240 ducks there. And then he also showed me a menu in a slide of the cost at restaurants for purchasing a mallard, a black duck, a ruddy duck, whatever. I calculated the mean, and it was $1.69. And in 1875, when presumably that picture was taken, the cost for those 240 ducks about $400. But you inflate it over the years, and this would have amounted to over $8,700. Okay? So that's about $36 per duck. I'm sure I spend more than that each year in my exploits in conservation. So market hunting was a huge and one of the first catalysts for people to begin concerned about conserving waterfowl and wetlands. Bird extinction. Everybody know what these birds? What is the name of the duck that's shown here? That's no longer. The what?
Labrador.
The Labrador duck. Exactly right. That's in the upper left. In the middle is a passenger pigeon. Upper right, Carolina parakeet, Bachman's warbler. And what's this strange looking bird? The great hawk. Great hawk. So those are birds that went extinct prior to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And again, another strong influence towards water bird and all bird conservation. Diseases were rampant, particularly diseases caused by lead poisoning. All states were required to use non-toxic shot back in the early 1990s, but back in the days when lead was used in shotgun shells, thousands of birds, no one knows actually how many actually died each year. But back in the 1950s, I think Dr. Frank Belrose estimated that by 1950, that 300,000 tons of lead shot killed over 2 million waterfowl annually. So, and I show that picture of an eagle there, and you know, birds like our national icon, the eagle, would suffer lead poisoning, not because they would actually pick up lead pellets from the sediments, but by eating crippled ducks that were shot with lead birds. And interestingly, lead poisoning, or plumbolism as it's called, is only human-induced waterfowl disease. Other diseases now that are important in causing major losses of waterfowl: avian cholera, botulism, duck virus, enteritis, or DVE. You hear a lot nowadays about avian influenza or bird flu, not only in passerines and waterfowl and other water birds, but also in the poultry industry as well. There's been some discussion on one of our waterfowl blogs after this recently about concerns about bird flu being transmitted to the poultry industry. The millinery trade. Okay, back in the day, I remember pictures of my grandmother from the early 20th century with hats with all kinds of snowy egret plumes in them. But those birds were slaughtered as well. And a little bit later, we'll talk about an act that put an end to what they called millinery bird. Okay, this was the act, the Weeks-McLean Act, 1930. 13, predecessor of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and as I said, it ended millinery murder. It gave the Secretary of Agriculture some control over for hunting season, but back in those days, even though we were hunting migratory waterfowl, if they migrate or move through a state, people within the state thought that they were state property instead of being possessions or natural resources that didn't belong to anybody but the continent. So that particular act did not hold up in a lot of legislative debates, and finally, as I mentioned, it was replaced by the Migratory Bird Treaty. And here we talk about the Migratory Bird Treaty, and this series of slides here were developed by Jerry Surrey, Bob Bloom, and David Sharp. Bob Bloom did his master's and PhD work at the University of Wisconsin. He was responsible for me leaving Marquette University and ending up at Stevens Point. That's a whole other story that I told earlier to the students. But that man, a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin, went on to be the director of Office of Migratory Bird Management and retired about five years ago. But he got me pointed in the right direction, and eventually I got the company appointed. Okay, the Canadians were really the ones that started this vanguard toward the Migratory Bird Treaty. And this gentleman here, C. Gordon Hewitt, he was an econ entomologist working for a Canadian Bureau, and he was the one that was responsible for drafting up the first convention between Great Britain, Canada, and the United States. And see, Canada didn't become a country until sometime in the 1920s, so they were still under the oversight of Canada, of England. So in 1916, about 100 years ago, 101 years ago, in fact, King George V of Great Britain and Canada signed the treaty, and then subsequently President Roosevelt the next month signed it for the United States. It still was not an act at that point in time, and it was 2 years of legislative struggles, if you will, much lobbying going on in Washington, D.C., but in the middle of World War I, they passed the treaty and transformed it into the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and that was signed in July 1918 by President Woodrow Wilson. Then I asked the question, why have these other states got involved? So the original countries were Canada and the United States, but why Mexico? Why Japan? Why Russia? Any ideas, folks? The reason is because we share waterfowl resources with those other countries. Okay, maybe you remember a story some years ago where some Japanese scientists banded a male pintail that ended up being harvested in California. How did it get there? Across the Bering Straits into Alaska and presumably now south of California. So that one single bird was evidence of connectivity between Japan and the United States. Okay, so what is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act? It's protected lots of birds, okay? Over 1,000, as the slide illustrates. Most of them are non-game species, but over 200 are game species. Anyone know how many waterfowl game species it is lawful for us to hunt here in North America? Correct answer, no. All. Single one. Okay. So we've done a pretty good job sustaining harvestable populations of waterfowl. If you're looking for a number, it's about 52 or 53. Go to Dr. Baldassari's book and count them. He's an alumnus of the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and Dr. NAWMP's graduate student back in the mid-1970s. He would have graduated about 76, somewhere about then. We lost him several years ago, and a great colleague and great friend. My son studied under him at State University of New York at Syracuse. Okay, we'll push forward here and talk about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act advancements. It was a 1997 amendment basically it terminated breeding season hunting. That was lawful for natives people, but in just about 20 years ago actually, that was terminated and no more hunting from March into August, which was allowed since 1918. And then another reform that was signed by President George Bush Sr., and basically that amendment was to recognize in the Migratory Bird Treaty Act only native species. Now in the lower right hand, we have 2 species of waterfowl there. Can you name those? Not Canadian geese, Canada geese. I'll always make that correction, it's Canada geese. Okay. All right, what about those big white birds? What kind of swans those are? Mute swans, okay? Those are what I call kudzu swans, they're exotics. Royalty from Great Britain brought those to the United States. They're quite troublesome in places, particularly in the Great Lakes and in the Chesapeake Bay. Those particular birds, the mute swans, are not protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act because they are non-native. Okay, some of the authorities of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I won't go through all of them, but we'll focus on some of the underscored, prohibited commercial hunting, that were closed seasons, unlawful to hunt except organized by regulations, regulations governing hunting, possession, and transportation. Okay, those are all passed. And then we manage harvest nowadays through a scheme called the NAWMP harvest management, and it helps to sustain populations within harvestable levels. Okay, going back, another influence that really fueled conservation was the dirty 30s. And in October 1929, Black Tuesday happened, it was when the stock market crashed, and that was the beginning of the Great Depression. And we see Donald Duck wondering, how are we going to conserve waterfowl when we're in the red? Migratory Bird Conservation Act was also enacted that year in 1929, and it established opportunity for the federal government and the states to establish and acquire land for migratory birds and national wildlife refuge. But that wasn't the first time the National Wildlife Refuge was established. Anyone remember what the first National Wildlife Refuge was? Pelican Island, located in Florida, okay? Established by who? What individual? Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, so let's think about 30s, and you see that mom with her child. What's land stewardship? Are we concerned about family survival? You see the impacts of the dust storm that was really prevalent in the Central Flyway. So there was a decade of what people said was significant losses of wetlands, of course, and waterfowl populations. But we didn't know actually how small the actual populations got. I remember my grandfather telling me that some of the best hunting that he remembered Lake Butte and places like that was during the dirty 30s. He said we had plenty of ducks back in those days. But the Dust Bowl didn't impact the Mississippi River area. It was pretty much restricted to the Central Flyway. That was the Dust Bowl era. That was way before the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ever began annual surveys of breeding populations of birds. So we don't know how low those populations actually got in that period. Who is this gentleman hunter? Anybody else? Who? A little louder. Can't hear well. Ding Darling. J. Norwood Ding Darling. Born in Wisconsin. Grew up in Iowa. He was a cartoonist. He was commissioned by another Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to develop, to draw the first duck. And he wasn't very happy with the image he scratched out on a piece of paper. Someone got a hold of it, reproduced it, and that was the first duck stamp, $1. It's a foundation for conservation that has gone forward. Was there some pictures of some recent stamps? Just 2015 price enhancement from $15 to $25. It's still extremely economical. I encourage you to buy multiple stamps and take a person hunting and buy them their stamp and get them started. You can see the hundreds of millions of dollars that are generated that are used for conservation of wetlands and waterfowl as a result of those stamps. And I understand that the duck stamp contest will be hosted here when, Jake?
September.
Next September. Okay. And that'll, this slide that you see there, that's Jimmy Hawkins, 2017-18 duck stamp campaign. He's a fellow Midwesterner from Minnesota. Okay. Federal aid and wildlife restoration, Dingle Johnson Act, excise taxes that are placed on firearms, ammunition, fishing, camping supplies, so on and so forth. Point paying and hunters and fishermen, fishers pay. And as the slide indicates, since 1937, $8 billion. Those two important acts not only are important for the acquisition and conservation of land, but they are also the funds that go to respective states and departments of natural resources that help support applied research. So Jake is already connected with Wisconsin DNR and getting funding through the DNR through what we call the PR offices, Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration. And much of my research over the years at Mississippi State University was funded through PR. Okay, 30-30s. This gentleman, Fred Lincoln, as we call the father of the flyways, he started looking at banding data. Banding goes back to the 1920s, so he had probably a decade or so of data to look at where birds were banded in the north, where they were harvested along the flyways. And he came up with this concept of the flyway system. The predecessor of Ducks Unlimited, Francis Knapp, started that program called More Game Birds in America. The first EU project was in Manitoba, west of Portage and Prairie, Manitoba, where I work. It's a big grass marsh, and as I mentioned, More Game Birds for America transformed itself in 1937 into Ducks Unlimited, the leader in wetlands conservation worldwide to this day. Remember that slide, Jay? Some of the earlier research, that acorn slide was one of Jake's. We harvested a duck, or we all harvested some ducks. Its esophagus was full of notable acorns, long acorns with striations, and then a bunch of little snails. And I put that those esophageal contents there because the early food habits research focused only on gizzard content. So what was found in the gizzards were hard seeds, certainly not invertebrates, because what persisted after the foods passed the intestines, ultimately to end up in the gizzard, were hard seeds. So it gave us a very biased perspective of the whole cadre, the suite of foods that birds were feeding on. And then later research in the 1970s changed the whole focus on what we call not food habits, but feeding ecology. Birds would be observed foraging for a period of time, then collected by the scientists, and birds, the foods that were in the crop were examined. So that's how we discovered the importance of aquatic invertebrates in the diet, an important source of protein. Food sustains individual organism, so that's why some of the earliest research focused upon foods. And everyone knows this person, Father of Wildlife Management. Aldo Leopold did a game survey of North Central states. 1933, he published Game Management. That was a textbook that I used here at Stevens Point. Read all those chapters as prescribed by Dr. Fred Baumgartner. And we would be tested from that book. And even in the 70s, you know, it was the Bible, but it was pretty archaic by those times. Dr. NAWMP changed things significantly. He showed up from Ohio State and got us more in line with some of the more contemporary findings. And I learned ecology from Dr. White in the biology department. The class that I had skipped the most were Friday afternoons because he taught a class, Dr. White, at 2:45 Friday afternoon. By then I was on my way down Highway 10 heading for Manitowoc to see my girlfriend, my wife for 47 years. We had to go hunting on the weekends. That's why I wasn't there, Charlie. Yeah. He passed me. Okay. A little known story about Aldo Leopold is that the people who established the Delta Waterfowl Wetland Research Station in Manitoba, and there was my wife's and I's little cottage where we lived, and I was doing research. But really, the family who owned all that property was the Bell family from Minneapolis that owned General Mills. And they went to George Retreats, the waterfowl professor, the first waterfowl professor at Michigan State University, asked him if he would take graduate students to build the Waterfowl Research Station and start those programs. He was too busy writing his book, Michigan Waterfowl. That's how Leopold got the job of being Professor H. Elmer Polk. And that's how the University of Wisconsin got connected with waterfowl. It was a default because the professor at Michigan State declined the opportunity. That's a little known fact, but that's the truth. Okay, here's a person that we know. He's lectured here. He's lectured all over the country. He's now gone. Dr. Frank Belrose wrote 2 important classical books, East and Swans in North America. The last edition was written by Dr. Baldassari, who's now passed. Frank also wrote Ecology and Management with us. And one of my former students, Heath Hagee, who was one of your distinguished speakers here a couple of weeks ago, and he succeeded, not Frank, but in that same position there at Illinois Natural History Lab. And we're fortunate to now have Heath move to the southeast and be the waterfowl scientist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over all the refuges in the southeastern region of the states. We need to get another leader at the Natural History Survey. Awesome research over the decades was conducted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Geological Survey. The Tucson Wildlife Research in Laurel, Maryland. It's a place where they did research to imprint moving cranes to people, and subsequently with airplanes so the birds would learn how to migrate. And this is Northern Prairie Wildlife Research, where the prairie pothole research was done for decades. My former student, Dr. Aaron Pierce, is a scientist there. And then there's another place out in California, Dixon, California. So those are the 3 federal laboratories, if you will, around the country that are conducting waterfowl wetlands research. This is BU Canada's headquarters at Oak Hammock, just north of Winnipeg in Manitoba. And that place was established in the late 1980s and is still the site for much research across all of Canada. After World War II, planes and pilots came back to the United States and they started using aircraft to begin to survey waterfowl populations. And the gentleman in the middle there, again, is father of flyers, Frederick Lincoln. Some of the first aerial waterfowl surveys he conducted were of the Potomac River from his office out of Washington, D.C. And since 1955, we've been conducting aerial surveys of breeding populations all across northern United States and Canada. It's the most complete wildlife survey that exists worldwide. As I said, it's been around since 1955. Here's a picture of Aaron, who I just mentioned, doing surveys, aerial line transect surveys of ducks in Mississippi for his PhD. And since Aaron's work was completed, then other states within the lower Mississippi alluvial valley, Arkansas, Missouri, and Louisiana, have adopted those procedures. We're developing it now. Just got a text from Molly, one of my former students, who is now one of the South Carolina waterfowl biologists. We just finished a survey today. We're surveying not only ducks, but all detectable waterfowl, water birds, including woodstones. We've got to revise everything now because we're surveying too much pine land, too many swamps where you can't see birds, so on and so forth. I have a graduate student that's been the topic of this research to refine those surveys. Waterfowl banding, as I mentioned, got started way back in the 1920s, but look at the incredible numbers of birds that have been banded since day one. Over 20 million, 17% of those have been recovered by hunters. And data from those types of surveys are used to estimate survival, but most importantly to illustrate distributions of birds throughout the flyways in the continent. We now have the HIP program, the Harvest Information Program. Back in the day, waterfowl hunters are randomly selected, you fill out a card of what you harvested, the problems with that. They've generalized the survey now more, and it's improving in that way that they can keep a record of indices of harvest in terms of species, age, and sex of birds. Okay, this next series of slides were provided by Dr. Bruce Batt, former chief biologist for Ducks Unlimited, and his colleague, my colleague Jim Ringelman, who was manager of conservation for Ducks Unlimited in the Bismarck office, and both of these gentlemen are retired from Ducks Unlimited now. An early paradigm was that maybe what we needed to do was try and drought-proof the prairies. They were reflecting back to the 30s and other periods of drought, and maybe there was ways of engineering capacity that we could use dams and other infrastructure to provide water that birds would use to survive during these drought-stricken periods. So this is kind of some of the early dams that were really monsters. I can remember when I first went to work for Ducks Unlimited in Canada in 1979, the biologists were run by the engineers. It was really an engineer's focus in those days. Even though we had this group that we called ourselves Biological Services Group, we provide them advice, but they always overbuilt. The Living Corps of Engineers overbuilt nowadays. But now it's come full circle where the biologist provides the advice to the engineer. This is the ecological mosaic that we want to established, how should you build that? So it's come full circle. Yeah, it was a circus when I was there. It was one of the reasons why I left. It was just being too much control, basically, managed by engineers. So, okay, duck population started declining. We always had dynamics, but then, late 1970s, there was a precipitous decline, and at the same time, research was demonstrating that not only were we losing wetlands as a result of the drought, populations were plummeting, but those birds that were nesting were experiencing extremely low levels of nest success. And I think the average there was about 8%. Dr. Lou Cowarden in those days was studying modeling relationships between nest success and population trajectories of mallards, and his research indicated that just to basically sustain or stabilize the population, that 15 of 100 nests, or 15% nest success had to attain, just to keep it stable, not to increase, but to keep it stable. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to increase nest success. People thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You know, are we ever going to be able to bring back the ducks during this 10-year period of drought, basically from all of the 1980s? I mean, it was Dust Bowl City once again. And here's the picture that I wanted to show you. So Dr. Tom Nuds and a student put together data on nest success from a number of different publications over the years. And you can see the dramatic decline from back in the 30s to 1990. So based on a large sample size, this cartoon was very prevalent, where it showed USDA's Earl Butts' notion, who was Secretary of Agriculture back then. We're going to plant from row to row, and from fence row to fence row, only leaving these small patches that were easily searched by exploiting predators, foxes, raccoons that consume the eggs and or the females. You can see the rampant draining of the wetlands in that Missouri Coteau picture throughout North Dakota. So there were all kinds of problems on the landscape, yet our waterfowl hunters were focused back in those points. So we'll see that coming up shortly. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to intensively manage them. We did all kinds of intensive management. In Canada, on the upper right, we were cutting peninsulas off of creating islands, or island nesting waterfowl, thinking that birds could nest safely on those islands away from the mainland. We were trapping predators. We were releasing baby ducks. We had these huge fences, electrified fences around best nesting houses. We were putting out all kinds of nesting structures for birds. Did it work? Not significantly. Okay. When you manage for waterfowl whose home range is cotton, you have to manage at landscape scales. And it's all about configuring, juxtapositioning important types of habitats, not only wetlands, but surrounding uplands as well. Canada had a little different ideas. They wanted to live with agriculture. So again, Canada led the way, invoking waterfowl-friendly agriculture, zero or no-till, planting cold hardy crops as they were developed by the plant geneticists, particularly winter wheat that could survive the winter on the Canadian prairie. So when the birds would return in spring, there was cover for them, not just bare ground. And improving grazing systems. We've got cows on the landscape now, but before cows there were bison. Okay? And so we think back about managing paddocks of pasture land for bison, and put that in terms of cattle. So you can bring back some of the pristineness to those landscapes. Oh boy, first farm bill. tied to conservation initiatives, conservation reserve, wetlands reserve program. We took all kinds of marginal farmland, wetland, out of agricultural production, paid farmers, paid them take their land out of production and then revegetate those areas in natural grasses, sedges, or where appropriate, bottomland hardwoods. And now, after 30 years, after seeing those acorns and seedlings put in the ground, I drive across that Mississippi landscape and say, oh my God, we have oak orchards. We planted those trees too damn close together. Every 12 feet, they look like orchards. But nevertheless, those forest lands are being restored. Lots of important research went on during those 1980s. CRP evaluation by Ron Reynolds and his group from the Habit office in Bismarck. And his counterpart, another at the University of Wisconsin-StevensPoint alumnus, Chuck Lesh, who was my second graduate student. He taught himself GIS, and he's been an expert in that office since the late 1980s. The Institute of Waterfowl and Wetlands Research have done some limited in Canada, did their decade-long study of mallard recruitment from the prairie provinces in North Dakota. And then I was also part of what we call the MERP project, Marshall College Research Project, and basically what that was, a 10-year-long study of wetland dynamics, from water abundance, water quality, algae, all the way up the food chain to carnivores within the wetlands. So that book is still available from the University of Minnesota Press. Ducks were still declining in the mid-1980s, and Dr. Jim Patterson, deceased, was director of the Canadian Wildlife Service, and I remember him making this quote, "There must be a better way." And he teamed up with Raleigh Sparrow, who worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service then, and the two were the coordinators for the beginning of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. Signed in 1986 by Canada and the United States. And I'll ask you again at the end of this presentation, do you believe the North American Waterfowl Management Plan is the greatest ecosystem management plan that's ever been established, implemented, and sustained? As we go through these slides, I think it will say for itself what a great visionary project that has been for all of North America. And I wish Europe would get on board with something similar. Okay, these are slides from Mike Anderson and Dale Humbert, and they have a presentation at several North American Waterfowl Management Plan venues. And the challenges was, let's develop a plan and do something unprecedented for the restoration of wetlands and waterfowl so that we can sustain harvestable population of waterfowl in North America. They had big goals. Initial funding was zero. So it brought together partners from the public and the private sector in order to fund these initiatives that have been going on now for 30 years. Those were the original joint venture areas. That was a very brilliant concept of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. From here on, I'll say NAWMP, where we looked at critical landscapes, critical to wintering, migrating, and breeding waterfowl across North America. And those are the original ones. You see that one is in Wisconsin, that's up in Mississippi, Port Migratory corridor. But actually, very few focused on there initially. Those key areas in each of the 4 flyways that were important to all of North America. It didn't even include Alaska in those days. But soon things changed. The next slide now shows all bird joint venture areas. It's not just ducks. It's all migratory birds, and these are important joint venture areas that exist and have been delineated throughout North America. This was another great map, NAWMP, North American Conservation. So several years after NAWMP, the stewards got together and said, now we need a wetlands conservation initiative that will continue to conserve and restore wetlands on both public and private lands. And it will provide federal funding. There's also going to have to be matching grants. And to this day, on average, I think it's a 2-to-1 match. That's what's been for every $1 million that NAWMP will provide federal funds, they'll match that with an additional $2 million from public and private sources to sustain these programs. There it is. Okay, so what's been done thus far? $1.28 billion, 2,300 projects, and leveraging about $2.7 billion on average, a 2-to-1 leverageable match there. Why was NAWMP so successful? Well, it was born out of a crisis. Okay, we thought we were going to lose the opportunity for waterfowl hunting, and whether you like it or not, it's ecologically important, it's environmentally important, and I'm sure it is economically. I don't know how much duck hunting is worth in the state of Wisconsin. That'd be a good project for you to conduct, Jake. But we did a study probably 10 years ago now in Mississippi, and we determined that waterfowl hunting in the state of Mississippi, based on 23,000 registered hunters, is worth over $150 million a year. And that's just, it pales compared to deer hunting, that's about $900 million, but you all got probably over 100,000 duck hunters here in Wisconsin. So I think that would be a good leverage to have those data. Jake, find out how much it's worth. It'd be a good one to work with Kent on. Certainly had compelling objectives. Joint ventures was brilliant innovation, lots of partnerships, and then a commitment to adaptive management every 5 years, not just updates, but evaluations and revisions. Lots of challenges yet, particularly in northern breeding grounds. Commodity prices are high. You can farm gravel and still make money. See the threats there from agriculture. I was brought up on a farm. I understand farming, but at the same time, you've got to find that perfect balancing act of conserving natural landscapes. Other problems in the south on the wintering grounds: sea level rise. We're losing marshes to sea level rise. You all remember the Gulf oil spill not too many years ago. Wind power, good. Windmills, we have in Wisconsin here through that rolling topography around Lake Winnebago.
Niagara Escarpment.
The what?
Niagara Escarpment. Oakhill Ledge.
Anyway, the rolling topography, the lakes area, around Elkhart Lake, it's all right. Kettle Moraine, that's it. Kettle Moraine, that's it. It takes teamwork.
Doesn't it, Christine?
Loretta and I play that game all the time. It's something that happens after 60, it takes teamwork, Okay, so we have these challenges, but these challenges create opportunities for conservation. Rice is very important to humans, but it's a particularly important grain also to waterfowl. And the shallowness of rice fields is really important to wide diversity of water birth. But in California and Texas, there was much water anymore. Fortunately, we had an El Nino this winter in California. The reservoirs are full, but Texas is still very dry, and birds gravitate to these types of wetlands. And then we're concerned about continued loss of wetlands, particularly important prairie pockets. And these are some excerpts from a recent blog on the NAWMP listserv where Jim Ringleton had some comments about the potential threat of losing 75% of potholes in North Dakota because they're not rigorously protected by the swamp buster. USDA and RCS has a definition of what is a wetland, and at this point in time, the criteria are weak, and there's a potential threat that we could lose about 75% of those wetlands, which would have a very negative impact upon continental waterfowl populations. 2012 comes along, and North American Waterfowl Management Plan is revised. And the focus here is on people. And here's some of the goals. We won't go through all of those, but the focus again is on people. And there's a slide I was looking for, because think about it. Only a pristine sense, a pristine landscape is conservation occurred by itself. But without people nowadays, and our impacts on the landscape, conservation is not occurred without people. So I like to refer to it as a trinity. Populations of wildlife, habitat, which is the underpinning of all, and then of course people. Okay, so what's different about it is actually a vision. It's not just update, and again, it acknowledges strong linkages between the goals and a wide diversity of stakeholders. Again, I'm not going to focus upon all these. We're running out of time. I'm talking too much. But I'd like you to just look at number 5, because I added that to the numbers. And I said increase the adaptive capacity. What they're talking about primarily is adaptive harvest, but also population management. But I think it's bigger than that. It's harvest, habitat, and human. So that's why I put the HQ in there. It's adaptive HQ management. That again is the trinity that we've got to focus on. Doing all kinds of surveys, not just the duck hunters, but people that love to view the waterfowl. Again, there's a hunter survey, doing a public survey of random people, trying to find out demographics of people who will support conservation of natural resources in its grandest sense. Doing lots of workshops. There's a new workshop that will be occurring in September, someplace on the east coast. Okay, that shows the dynamics of waterfowl population since we've been counting the birds in 1955. And originally we focused on trying to manage for populations over the long term, basically the average, that blue line. So manage for variability in the long-term average. But what's also important is that we must ensure that we've got adequate habitat during those periods of great abundances, when the waterfowl populations actually spike well above the long-term average. We need to have adequate wetland and upland and all kinds of habitats throughout the flyways to sustain those populations during periods of great abundance. As I mentioned before, hunters and fishers are primary supporters. The number of waterfowl hunters is dramatically declining. You see that peak in the late 60s, early 70s. I think that's because the baby boomers were coming of age. They were 16 years of age, they could drive a car, they could go hunting, and that was my generation. now we're declining. Canada's been pretty much flat. There's more waterfowl hunters in the United States and Canada than Canadians themselves. So, and we're getting old. There's still a number of us that are out there, enjoy fellowship and conservation, and the duck line and Kennedy problem. Okay, a few years ago I published a couple of papers that talked about the waning of university waterfowl programs, and that's still happening. Back in the heydays of the 1970s, when I was here at Point and later at Michigan State, all the smiley faces indicate the universities around the United States and Canada that had a waterfowl wetlands program. And you can see about 80% of them did. Let's move on. 2013, 40%, 42% decline. These are the statistics that sold Mr. Kennedy on endowing my former program at Mississippi State, endowing the program at Clemson, endowing the program here at Point, and now subsequently at Colorado State University. And there's other places in the joint venture areas where we still need these programs. And not only in waterfowl, but all wildlife, okay? Jake, you're getting restless. The red smiley faces are the ones that have been sustained, and we have 7 programs endowed in perpetuity, 4 of which were done by Mr. Kennedy, and here at Stevens Point by Mr. Kennedy and David Brody, and Keith them to endow this program. So that there will always be waterfowl wetlands emphasis here in the college. Okay, this is my wish list. There's 15 wishes here. These are some ideas that aren't only mine but other people. And I think these are some of the notions that could help to generate funds. The bottom line is it's fun. It's fun to do conservation in action. And we were talking this afternoon about hope one day that Wisconsin and a bunch of other states would adopt what we call the Missouri model, where all is a very small tax put on the sale of everything. Anyone with any revenue buying power is going to be taxed for natural resources. These folks, a lot of folks don't need any ducks, but everybody needs clean air, clean water. Make them pay for it. Currently, Missouri, with their 1/8 of 1% sales tax, generates over $95 million a year for support of the university, the Missouri Department of Conservation. And you wouldn't see all of that being done in Missouri without this money that everyone who buys anything is helping pay for. So I'll let you all look at these once the presentation, but I think that number one thing could really, really go a long way. Minnesota's got it. Did you say, Christine?
Yeah, Iowa just passed.
Iowa just passed it. Arkansas has one. But it's one of those painless taxes. It's like a city restaurant tax. You pay a little, but you don't feel it. Some people are going to complain initially because it's a tax. The hell with it. Think about it as a contribution to the future. It's not a tax, okay? You drink water, you eat fresh air, okay? I don't care if you shoot a gun, it doesn't matter. So, there's 15 here, and maybe a good class project, Jake, would be for your students. Maybe you and Scott could look at these 15 and get the students that are right up there. Jake would like to hear what they say about those ideas. Okay, so I blast through those. Here we go. I think it's Kansas ecosystem map. You know of another one. And who started it? Duck hunters. It's a selfish strategy so they can keep on going duck hunting. But they're altruistic, and they've invited all birds now and everything that benefits from the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. So, you know, here, the duck hunters. This is all we this is fodder for. Here's a quote that Jim said to me: "With this gift, I hope to ensure future generations have waterfowl wetlands to enjoy, and we can produce young people with passion to study and to remain for the natural resources." This is our guiding light. What we all must remember in our privileged positions of being candidate chairs, as well as being connected with the natural resources community. And my little buddy, during his PhD research, from dry bottomlands to deeply flooded bottomlands, put all of our logos out there. Now those are the candidate schools. We'll all begin to network now, work together, exchange students across the flyways, and finish this. 100 years.
All right. It's 5 o'clock. I think for those of you who are going to the Ducks Unlimited banquet tonight, that'll be a good opportunity to catch up with Dr. Kaminsky further and ask questions there. So I think we'll end the seminar now, and thank you guys again. Let's thank Dr. Kaminsky again.